So as we mentioned, the African Continental Free Trade Area will officially be operational today. The agreement will see Africa establishing a single market of more than 1.2 billion people. This comes at a time when the United Kingdom has ceased to be a member of the EU. The outgoing AU chairperson, President Cyril Ramaphosa, has commended Africa for making history. Mxolisi Ngulube is international trade economist. He joins us now. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, and best wishes for the season as well to you.
Thank you so much, Sapiso. And I'm a trade lawyer, not an economist.
Apologies for that. This is the title we're given. But let's start with Brexit lessons for African integration. We've heard obviously very competing statements. Britain saying freedom. Emmanuel Macron is calling it lies and, false promises. Some are even saying the EU should keep the lights on, as countries such as Scotland may even want to go back to the fold. So what lessons can we learn in our bid to integrate further as Africa?
I think generally as a continent, we're on the right step. We're moving the right direction with the Free Continental Trade Agreement. I think what the UK has done with Brexit is possibly is going to be detrimental in the long run, but that's debatable. Some scholars think that it's the other way around, but I think integration and if single market is the future, and especially in the world that we live in, where we share so many resources and it's such an integrated world, I think it's inevitable for you to have good relations with your neighbors. And the UK had it really good with the European Union. I'm not sure how it's going to be now with the new Brexit deal.
I mean, some are saying, obviously, this is an important point, but it is symbolic. What do you foresee as some of the major challenges in implementation, given that there have been several stickler points before? Countries have argued. I know just in terms of the tariffs, country of origin has been one of the major ones. What do you see as us butting our heads up against?
Yeah. I think forming an agreement like a single market and actually realizing into fruition in reality is a difficult challenge. It's not something that's done easily, and we saw it many years ago when the EU was trying to do a similar thing. It's a challenging process, especially in this continent. You're bringing together essentially 55 countries. You're trying to reach common ground on so many things. So the process itself is a difficult one. But the benefits in the long run outweigh the short term, because there are short-term detriments, especially for the weaker economies on the continent. We know that the weaker economies, for example, there are four main challenges that I think about when you think about the implementation of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement. One, most poor countries or weaker economies on the continent rely heavily on tariffs for revenues. So with the fall of the tariffs, essentially those revenues will go down. So in the short run, they'll be impacted negatively. Moreover, the cost of transitioning and really becoming part of a continental agreement and part of a single market is going to be costly. And some countries will be able to carry those costs, and other countries won't be able to carry those costs. And that's also because and there'll be a damage to some local economies and some local industries that are not strong enough to be competitive on a continental level. So in the short run, there are challenges. We must be realistic about that. But what I've seen over the last few months and over the last year is that many African institutions like the African Development Bank have really taken it upon themselves to come up with interventions to deal with those short-term effects, because there will be short-term effects, to support the informal industry, to support weaker economies. They've gone as far as giving them assistance in terms of technical assistance in the transition period. So there will be challenges, but those challenges are short-term, and the benefits in the long run outweigh the challenges. So I'm not saying that the AfCFTA is going to be all roses. It's not going to be all roses. It's going to be challenging.
I mean, you mentioned the prospect of a single country agreements that is more beneficial. And just in some of those tariff challenges that you mentioned, would that be more beneficial? I know there has been an agreement that for more developed countries, there must be a reduction, I think, of 90% for tariff lines over the next 5 years. For less developed countries, it will be 10 years. So do you foresee this working, or should we be tweaking it to suit single country agreements based on those inequalities that you mentioned?
But so I think as is at the moment, what the drafters and what the generally the Secretariat of the CFTA has shown is that they are aware that countries are at a different stage. Like certain countries are ready and certain countries need longer time to prepare for the Continental Free Trade Agreement, or rather, and to accept parts of it. And so what they've done is they've split it and really said, and as you correctly pointed out, saying that stronger countries can reduce 90%, but weaker countries have a longer period to do that. I think that's responsive enough. I don't think you necessarily need to have a single, or rather you need to have interventions that deal with singular countries. I think interventions that deal with countries of similar economies, so those are slightly weaker on the continent, are dealt with similarly. In the same way, for example, in the WTO. In the WTO, you get countries that are developing and least developing, and they are dealt with according to those groupings, to the point where least developing countries are given exceptions. We've tried to follow a similar fashion in the CFTA, and I think that's really important. So I don't think you need any more reforms. I think those reforms should be enough.
Now is the time for implementation, and I think that's what the world is waiting to see. And African countries have certainly been, revitalized to do that with COVID-19. It's giving us a much-needed push. Thank you so much, Mxolisi Ngulube, from he's international trade lawyer, and he speaks to us about the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area.